The laughter died the moment Patricia's voice cut through the living room. "He can't even buy his daughter new shoes," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "And we're supposed to call him a man?" 23 relatives, crystal glasses, a 7-year-old girl clutching her father's hand, her worn sneakers tucked beneath the chair. Derek Callahan said nothing. He had learned that silence was cheaper than truth. But his daughter looked up at him, eyes red, lips trembling. "Daddy, why does she hate us?" Before he could answer, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the house. 2 men in dark suits stood at the door. FBI badges. They asked for Derek by name. Patricia smirked, already composing her next insult. But what the agents said next would shatter everything she thought she knew. And by the end of that night, the useless man would be the only one left standing. The Whitmore estate sat on 3 acres of manicured lawn in Greenwich, Connecticut, the kind of property that whispered old money from every brick and beam. Derek pulled his 12-year-old Honda into the circular driveway, parking it between a Mercedes and a BMW, where it looked like a stray dog that had wandered into a Westminster show. Rosie pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass. "Daddy, the house has more windows than our whole building," she whispered. Derek killed the engine and sat there for a moment, watching the golden light spill from those windows onto the October evening. 3 years. 3 years since Meredith's funeral, and he still felt like an intruder in her family's world. His phone buzzed in his pocket, the 5th time in the last hour. He pulled it out just enough to see the caller ID, a number he recognized from another lifetime, then silenced it and slipped it back. Rosie noticed. She always noticed. "Is that work, Daddy? You can answer if you need to." Derek unbuckled his seatbelt and turned to face her. His daughter had her mother's eyes, that particular shade of green that seemed to hold light even in darkness. "Nothing is more important than you," he said. "Not today. Not ever." She smiled, but he could see the worry lines that no 7-year-old should carry. When had she started wearing those? They walked up the stone path together, Rosie's hand small and warm in his. She had insisted on wearing her favorite dress, the purple one with the stars that Meredith had bought her the Christmas before the accident. The hem was getting short now, and one of the stars had come loose, dangling by a thread. Derek had meant to fix it. He had meant to fix a lot of things. At the door, he paused to straighten his tie, a plain blue one he had bought at a thrift store because his good ties had disappeared, along with so many other things, after Meredith died. When he looked down, he noticed Rosie trying to hide her feet behind his legs. Her sneakers were scuffed and faded, the soles worn thin. He had been saving to buy her new ones, but the transmission had gone out on the Honda last month. The door swung open before he could knock, and Eleanor Whitmore stood there in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than his rent. His mother-in-law had the kind of face that photographers loved, all high cheekbones and careful composure, but her eyes had grown colder since her daughter's death. "Derek," she said. Not hello, not welcome, just his name, like a fact she was forced to acknowledge. "And Rosie, darling." Her voice warmed slightly as she bent to kiss her granddaughter's cheek. "Your cousins are in the playroom." Rosie looked up at Derek, asking permission with her eyes. He nodded and squeezed her hand once before letting go. "I'll be right here if you need me." The living room was already crowded with Whitmores and their extended network of in-laws and family friends. Derek recognized most of them from the wedding, from the funeral, from the handful of holidays he had endured since. They stood in clusters, holding wine glasses and speaking in the measured tones of people who had never worried about making rent. The television mounted above the fireplace was tuned to a news channel, the volume low, and Derek's eyes drifted to it as he moved toward the corner of the room. A banner scrolled across the bottom of the screen, something about a major cyberattack on financial institutions. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He knew more about that attack than anyone in this room could imagine. more than the newscasters reading their teleprompters, more than the FBI analysts scrambling to contain it. But that was another life, a life he had walked away from. Harold Whitmore intercepted him near the bar, a crystal tumbler of scotch in his hand. Derek's father-in-law had the broad shoulders and commanding presence of a man who had built his fortune from scratch, but his eyes had grown tired in the years since Meredith's death. "Derek," he said, and unlike his wife, there was something almost like warmth in his voice. "How's the consulting business?" It was the same question he asked every time, and Derek gave the same answer. "It pays the bills." Harold nodded, and for a moment, Derek thought he might say something more, something real. But then Patricia appeared at her father-in-law's elbow, and the moment evaporated like morning frost. Patricia Whitmore had married Gregory, Meredith's older brother, and she had spent the last decade making sure everyone knew she had married up. She was beautiful in the way of women who spent significant time and money on their appearance, with blonde highlights and designer clothes, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Derek," she said, drawing out his name like it was something distasteful. "I'm surprised you could make it. I know how busy you must be with your little computer thing." Derek felt his shoulders tense, but kept his expression neutral. "I wouldn't miss Oliver's birthday." Patricia's son was turning 8 today, and the party had been planned for months, complete with a catering team and a professional photographer. Derek had bought Oliver a model airplane kit, the kind you built yourself. He suspected it would end up unopened in a closet full of expensive toys. The evening wore on in the way these gatherings always did, with Derek hovering at the edges, while the Whitmores held court in the center. He checked on Rosie twice, finding her playing quietly with her cousins, but not quite part of their circle. She had always been like that, observing more than participating, carrying thoughts too heavy for her small frame. Around 8 o'clock, the adults gathered in the living room for cake and champagne, and Derek found himself standing near the window, watching the darkness beyond the glass. His phone buzzed again. He ignored it. On the television, the news coverage had grown more urgent, the scroll of text moving faster, the anchors' faces more serious. Words like unprecedented and national security floated through the air, mixing with the clink of glasses and the murmur of conversation. Patricia had been drinking steadily since dinner, and her voice had grown louder with each glass of champagne. Derek felt her attention shift to him like a spotlight, and he braced himself for what was coming. "You know what I don't understand," she announced to no one in particular, though her eyes were fixed on him. "How a man can call himself a father when he can't even provide for his child." The conversations around her stuttered and fell silent. Derek said nothing. He had learned long ago that engaging with Patricia only gave her more ammunition. "I mean, look at her shoes," Patricia continued, gesturing vaguely toward the hallway where Rosie had gone. "Falling apart. And that dress? It's practically a rag." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. Harold cleared his throat. Gregory, Patricia's husband, stared at his phone, deliberately absent from the conversation. Derek noticed that Gregory had been on his phone all evening, stepping away to take calls, his face growing more strained each time. "Patricia," Eleanor said quietly, "perhaps this isn't the time." But Patricia was beyond hearing. The champagne had loosened something in her, some reservoir of resentment that had been building for years. 3 years, she said, her voice rising. 3 years, and he still lives in that apartment, still drives that car, still works his mysterious job that somehow never pays enough for new shoes. She turned to face Derek directly, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been triumph. "You know what Meredith told me once? She said she worried about you. Said you were hiding something. She died worrying about you." The words hit Derek like a physical blow, but he kept his face still. He had trained himself to absorb pain without showing it, first in the military, then in the bureau. But this was different. This was Meredith. And now here you are, Patricia continued, playing the grieving widower, the devoted father, when everyone knows you're just a leech. You married up and now you're clinging to her family because you have nowhere else to go. She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. He can't even buy his daughter new shoes. And we're supposed to call him a man? The silence that followed was absolute. 23 relatives stood frozen, their glasses suspended halfway to their lips. Derek felt the weight of their judgment, their pity, their quiet agreement. None of them spoke. None of them defended him. And in that silence, he heard small footsteps behind him. Rosie had come back from the playroom. She stood in the doorway, her worn sneakers visible beneath the hem of her too-short dress, her mother's green eyes filling with tears. She walked to her father and slipped her hand into his. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why does she hate us?" Derek knelt down, bringing himself to her level. He cupped her face in his hands, wiping her tears with his thumbs. The room, the judgment, the years of silent contempt, all of it faded away. There was only his daughter, only this moment. "She doesn't hate us, sweetheart. Sometimes people say things they don't mean when they're hurting." But even as he said it, he wondered how much longer he could keep making excuses for a world that refused to see them. Patricia opened her mouth to say something more, but she never got the chance. 3 sharp knocks cut through the silence like gunshots. Everyone turned toward the front door. Harold frowned and moved to answer it, but the door swung open before he reached it, and 2 figures stepped into the foyer. They moved with the controlled precision of people who were used to entering rooms uninvited. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. The woman was smaller, but carried herself with the same quiet authority. Both wore dark suits. Both held badges. "FBI." The granite-faced man spoke first. "We're looking for Derek Callahan." The room erupted in whispers. Patricia's face lit up with vindication. "I knew it," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I knew he was hiding something." But the agents weren't looking at Patricia. They were looking at Derek, and their expressions held something that didn't match her narrative. Recognition. Respect. "Agent Cole," the man said, extending his hand. "This is Agent Reyes. We need to speak with you, privately." The woman, Agent Reyes, stepped forward. She was younger than Cole, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held a familiarity that made Derek's stomach tighten. "It's been a while, Callahan," she said quietly. 3 years. Derek felt Rosie's hand tighten in his. He looked down at his daughter, then back at the agents. "Whatever this is, it can wait." Agent Cole shook his head. "I'm afraid it can't." He pulled out a tablet and turned it toward Derek. On the screen was a photograph of a little girl, blonde hair and pigtails, a gap-toothed smile. She looked about Rosie's age. "Lily Chen," Cole said. 6 years old, kidnapped 18 hours ago. Her father is a systems engineer at First National. The people who took her are using her as leverage to breach the banking network. The same attack you're seeing on the news." Derek stared at the photograph. 18 hours. In kidnapping cases, the first 24 were critical. After that, the odds of recovery dropped dramatically. "What does this have to do with me?" Agent Reyes glanced at the roomful of watching Whitmores, then back at Derek. "We've traced the attack signature. It's Constantine's network." The name landed like a bomb in Derek's chest. Constantine, the one that got away. The case that had consumed 3 years of his life before he left the bureau. "He's escalating," Reyes continued. "The banking hack is just the beginning. We've intercepted communications suggesting a coordinated attack on multiple financial institutions, trillions of dollars at risk, and a 6-year-old girl who won't survive if we don't find her in the next 6 hours." She paused, her voice dropping. "We need you, Derek. You're the only one who ever got close to him. You're the only one who can stop this." The room had gone completely silent. The Whitmores stood frozen, their expressions ranging from confusion to shock. Patricia's smirk had vanished, replaced by something pale and uncertain. "Wait," she said, her voice smaller now. "What are you talking about? He's a computer consultant." Agent Cole turned to look at her, his granite face revealing nothing. "Ma'am, Derek Callahan spent 12 years as a special agent with the FBI Cyber Division. He was the lead investigator on 17 major international cases, including the takedown of the Volkov Syndicate, which was, until recently, the largest cybercrime organization in the Western Hemisphere." The words hung in the air like smoke. 17 cases. The Volkov Syndicate. Names that had appeared in newspapers and on news channels, always attributed to anonymous federal agents. "He retired 3 years ago," Cole continued, "to raise his daughter. His wife had just died, and he made a choice." He looked at Derek with something that might have been respect. He walked away from the highest clearance level in the division, walked away from a career that most agents would kill for, because his daughter needed him. Patricia's face had gone the color of old paper. But the apartment, the car, the shoes. Her voice trailed off as the implications sank in. Agent Reyes answered without looking at her. Agent Callahan's pension and savings could easily afford a better lifestyle. He chooses to live modestly because he doesn't want to attract attention to himself or his daughter. There are people who would love to find the man who destroyed their operations. She turned back to Derek. People like Constantine. Derek felt the weight of every eye in the room, but he was looking at his daughter. Rosie stared up at him with wide eyes. "Daddy? You were a spy?" Despite everything, Derek almost smiled. "Not exactly, sweetheart. I caught bad guys who use computers to hurt people." Rosie considered this for a moment. "Like superheroes?" Derek knelt down to her level. "Nothing that exciting. Just a lot of sitting at desks and looking at screens." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I stopped because I wanted to be with you. Because nothing in the world is more important than being your dad." Agent Cole cleared his throat. "Callahan, I understand your situation. I wouldn't ask if there was any other way. But we've run every analyst we have against this network, and they can't crack it. Constantine has adapted. He's using architecture that only you understand, because you helped design the protocols that inspired it." Derek closed his eyes. The protocols. Of course. During his last year at the Bureau, he had developed a new approach to tracking encrypted communications, a system that had been classified and implemented across multiple agencies. It had never occurred to him that someone might reverse engineer it, use his own creation against him. "The girl," he said quietly. "Lily Chen. What are her chances?" Reyes's face tightened. "If we don't find her in the next few hours, close to 0. Constantine doesn't leave loose ends." Derek thought about the photograph. Blonde pigtails, gap-toothed smile. A little girl who was probably terrified, probably wondering why no one had come to save her. He thought about Rosie, about the night Meredith died, about the phone call that had pulled him away from his family and the choice he had made afterward. And then he felt a small hand tug at his sleeve. "Daddy." Rosie's voice was quiet but steady. "The little girl. She's scared, isn't she?" Derek nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. She's very scared." Rosie bit her lip, a habit she had inherited from her mother. "Then you have to help her. You have to bring her home to her daddy." The words struck Derek like a revelation. This was Meredith's daughter. Meredith, who had spent her life helping others, who had worked double shifts as a nurse because she couldn't bear to see anyone in pain. Of course Rosie would understand. Of course she would see what needed to be done. Derek stood and faced the agents. "I'll help you. On one condition." Cole raised an eyebrow. "Name it." Derek put his hand on Rosie's shoulder. "She stays with me. I don't let her out of my sight. The agents exchanged glances. Callahan, this is a federal operation. Reyes started, but Derek cut her off. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them. I lost my wife because I wasn't there when she needed me. I won't make that mistake again. A long moment passed. Then Cole nodded. Fine. But she stays in the command vehicle. This isn't a field trip. As Derek moved toward the door, he passed Gregory Whitmore. Meredith's brother had been silent throughout the confrontation, his face growing paler by the minute. Now Derek noticed something he had missed before, the sheen of sweat on Gregory's forehead. The way his hands trembled slightly as they clutched his phone. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Derek saw something flicker across Gregory's face. Fear. Not the fear of someone watching an unexpected drama unfold. The fear of someone who had something to hide. Derek filed it away and kept walking. The FBI's mobile command center was parked 2 blocks from the Whitmore estate, a black van bristling with antennas and satellite dishes. Inside, Derek found himself surrounded by screens displaying code, network maps, and real-time data feeds. It felt like coming home and walking into a nightmare simultaneously. Agent Reyes handed him a headset and a laptop. We've been tracking the attack for 18 hours. The encryption is like nothing we've seen. Every time we think we've found a vulnerability, the system adapts. Derek's fingers moved across the keyboard, calling up the network architecture. The familiar rhythm of analysis washed over him, 3 years of rust falling away as his mind engaged with the puzzle. But even as he worked, part of his attention stayed on Rosie, who sat in a corner of the van with a tablet Agent Cole had found for her. She was drawing something, her brow furrowed in concentration. There, Derek said after 20 minutes of intense focus. He pointed to a pattern in the data stream. The encryption isn't random. It's using a modified version of the Callahan protocol. Reyes leaned over his shoulder. Your protocol? Derek nodded grimly. Someone on the inside leaked it. Or someone with access to classified systems. His fingers flew across the keyboard. But they made a mistake. They kept the original authentication handshake. If I can inject a false verification. He trailed off, lost in the code. Lines of text scrolled across the screen as he worked, dismantling the digital fortress piece by piece. 2 hours later, Derek sat back, his eyes burning from the screen glare. I found the girl. Agent Cole appeared at his side instantly. Where? Derek pointed to a cluster of IP addresses on the screen. They're routing through a proxy network, but the authentication pattern leads back to a single location. A warehouse in Newark. He paused, a cold realization settling in his stomach. The financial data is being funneled through the same node. Someone with insider access is feeding them information. Bank routing numbers, security protocols, account structures. Reyes frowned. What kind of insider? Derek pulled up another screen, tracing the data flow backward. The path was clever, bouncing through a dozen jurisdictions, but he had spent years learning to follow these breadcrumbs. And then he found it. A single access point, a corporate login, Sterling Financial. The name hit him like a punch to the gut. Sterling Financial, where Gregory Whitmore served as chief financial officer. Derek stared at the screen, his mind racing through the implications. Gregory's nervous behavior, the constant phone calls, the fear in his eyes. Callahan? Reyes was watching him. You found something. Derek turned to face her. I know who the inside man is. 30 minutes later, Derek walked back into the Whitmore living room. The party had long since collapsed, the guests dispersing in confusion and whispered speculation. Only the family remained. Harold and Eleanor on the couch, Patricia pacing by the window, Gregory in an armchair, his phone clutched in white-knuckled hands, and Rosie, who had insisted on coming back with him, holding his hand with a grip that said she understood something important was happening. Derek, Harold stood up, his voice uncertain. The agents told us to wait here. They said you were helping them with something important. Derek didn't answer. His eyes were on Gregory, who had stopped breathing the moment Derek walked through the door. The attack on the financial system, Derek said, his voice calm and measured. It's being coordinated through Sterling Financial, specifically through CFO-level access codes. The color drained from Gregory's face. Patricia stopped pacing. What are you talking about? Gregory would never. But her voice faltered as she looked at her husband, really looked at him, and saw the truth written in his expression. How long have you been working with Constantine? Derek asked. Gregory's mouth opened and closed. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I don't know what you're... Derek took a step closer. The encrypted communications, the financial data, the kidnapping. It's all connected, and it all runs through your office. I've been tracking these people for years, Gregory. I know how they operate. And I know you're in too deep to get out on your own. The room had gone completely still. Patricia stared at her husband, as if seeing a stranger. It started small, Gregory whispered finally. His voice cracked like ice breaking. Debts. I had debts that Patricia couldn't know about. Investments that went wrong, and then they approached me, said they could make it all go away. He looked up at Derek with hollow eyes. I didn't know about the girl, I swear. When they told me they'd taken a child, I wanted to stop. But they said if I backed out, they'd come for Oliver, for Patricia, for everyone. At the mention of her son's name, Patricia made a sound like a wounded animal. She turned away, her shoulders shaking. Derek felt something unexpected, not rage, not satisfaction, but pity. Gregory Whitmore had made choices that led him here, but he was also a man trapped by his own weaknesses, manipulated by people who specialized in finding and exploiting fear. Where is she? Derek asked quietly. The girl. Where are they keeping her? Gregory's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. I have an address. A warehouse in Newark. They're supposed to move her tonight, after the final transfer goes through. Derek took the phone and handed it to Agent Cole, who had been standing silently in the doorway. Get a team there now. Fast entry, no warnings. Cole nodded and stepped outside, already speaking into his radio. In the silence that followed, a small voice cut through the tension. Uncle Gregory. Everyone turned. Rosie stood near the hallway, her worn sneakers visible beneath her star-covered dress. I heard you on the phone before, in the garden. You said, deal with the girl. You meant the little girl who got stolen, didn't you? Gregory's face crumbled completely. The question of a child had done what all of Derek's evidence could not. It had stripped away his last defenses. Patricia turned to face her husband, tears streaming down her face. All those years, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. All those years I defended you. I bragged about you. I looked down on Derek because he wasn't successful like you. And all along, she couldn't finish. The irony was too bitter, too complete. Derek knelt down beside Rosie. Hey, sweetheart, you did something really brave just now. She looked at him with those green eyes, so much like her mother's. Is the little girl going to be okay? Derek hugged her close. I hope so, baby. I really hope so. The call came 45 minutes later. Agent Reyes's voice crackled through the speaker. We got her. Lily Chen is safe, a little shaken, but physically unharmed. Derek closed his eyes, feeling something loosen in his chest that had been tight for hours. And Constantine? A pause. We didn't get him, but we got his network. The financial attack has been neutralized. We're looking at the biggest cybercrime bust in Bureau history. It was a victory, even if it wasn't complete. Constantine would surface again, but that was a problem for another day. Gregory was let out in handcuffs 20 minutes later. He didn't resist, didn't protest. Whatever fight he had left had drained away the moment Rosie spoke. Patricia stood at the window and watched them put her husband in the back of a federal vehicle. She hadn't said a word since his confession. Derek approached her carefully, not sure what to expect. He had every right to gloat, to throw her words back in her face. But looking at her now, he saw something he recognized. Grief. Loss. The collapse of everything she thought she knew. Patricia. She didn't turn around. "I don't want your pity," she said, her voice raw. "I know what I said to you, what I've been saying for years. I was wrong, about everything." Derek stood beside her, looking out at the night. "You were wrong about me, but you weren't wrong about everything. You loved Meredith. You still do. That's why you were so angry." Patricia finally turned to look at him. Her careful makeup was ruined, mascara trailing down her cheeks. "She was my best friend. Did you know that? Before she married you, we did everything together. And when she died, I needed someone to blame. Someone other than the drunk driver who hit her." She laughed bitterly. "You were an easy target, the quiet one, the one who didn't fight back." Derek thought about all the dinners, all the comments, all the small cruelties he had absorbed in silence. "I didn't fight back because Rosie needed family. You're all the family she has left from her mother's side. I couldn't risk losing that for her." Patricia's face crumpled, and I almost destroyed it. "God, Derek, the things I said about you, in front of her." She looked toward the hallway where Rosie had gone with Eleanor. "How do I even begin to apologize to that child?" "You start," Derek said quietly, "by being there. Not with presents or grand gestures. Just by being there." Patricia nodded slowly. For the first time in 3 years, she looked at Derek not with contempt or judgment, but with something approaching respect. "Meredith was right to choose you. I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." Eleanor Whitmore emerged from the hallway, Rosie's hand in hers. The older woman's eyes were red. But she walked with purpose toward Derek. "I owe you an apology," she said. "Harold and I both do. We let our grief become an excuse for treating you poorly. We should have protected you, not—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Derek shook his head. "Meredith loved you. That's enough for me." He looked at Rosie, who was watching the adults with careful attention. And she loved Rosie. If you want to honor her memory, be part of our daughter's life. That's all I've ever wanted." Harold stepped forward, his hand extended. It was the first time in 3 years that his father-in-law had offered to shake his hand. Derek took it. "Son," Harold said, and the word carried weight. "I don't know how to thank you, not just for tonight, but for raising that little girl the way you have. Meredith would be proud." Derek felt his throat tighten. "She would be proud of all of us, for figuring it out eventually." As they prepared to leave, Agent Reyes pulled Derek aside. "Callahan, the Bureau wants you back. After tonight, you could write your own ticket. Task force leader, whatever you want." Derek looked across the room at Rosie, who was showing her grandmother the drawing she had made in the command vehicle. It was a picture of a family, stick figures with big smiles. One of them had a badge. "Tell them thanks," he said. "But I already have the job I want." Reyes nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "I told them you'd say that. Take care of yourself, Derek, and take care of that little girl. She's something special." Derek watched his daughter laugh at something Eleanor said. "Yeah," he said quietly. "She really is." 2 weeks later, Derek and Rosie sat in their small apartment, eating breakfast at the kitchen table that wobbled slightly on its uneven legs. The morning sun streamed through the window, catching the dust motes that danced in the air. Everything was the same as it had always been, and everything had changed. A knock at the door interrupted their meal. When Derek opened it, he found a package on the welcome mat. No return address. He brought it inside and set it on the table. "What is it, Daddy?" Rosie asked, her cereal forgotten. Derek opened the box carefully. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a pair of shoes. Purple sneakers with silver stars on the sides, exactly like the ones Rosie had been eyeing in the store window for months. A small card rested on top. The handwriting was careful, hesitant. It said simply, "For Rosie, I'm learning." Patricia. Rosie pulled out the shoes, her eyes wide with wonder. "Daddy, look! They're beautiful!" She turned them over in her hands, examining every detail. "Can I wear them?" Derek nodded, his throat tight. "Of course, sweetheart." As he watched her try on the shoes, marveling at how perfectly they fit, she looked up at him with a question in her eyes. "Daddy, does this mean Aunt Patricia doesn't hate us anymore?" Derek knelt down beside her, adjusting the laces on her new shoes. "It means she's learning how to love again. Sometimes people forget how to do that when they're hurting. And sometimes they need help remembering." Rosie considered this with the gravity of a child who had already learned too much about loss. "Like how you helped the little girl find her way home to her daddy," Derek smiled. Something like that. They went to the park that afternoon, the same park where Rosie had taken her first steps, where Derek had pushed her on the swings, while Meredith sat on the bench and laughed at their antics. Rosie ran ahead, her new purple sneakers flashing in the sunlight, and Derek sat on that same bench and watched her play. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and looked at the screen. An unknown number. The same one that had been calling for weeks. For a moment, he let himself imagine answering it, returning to the life he had left behind. The cases, the challenges, the sense of purpose that came with protecting people from threats they would never know existed. Then Rosie waved from the top of the slide. "Daddy, watch me!" Derek turned off the phone and put it back in his pocket. He stood up from the bench and walked toward his daughter. Some battles could wait. Some victories mattered more than others. The slide was high, and Rosie sat at the top, her legs dangling over the edge. "Are you watching?" she called. "I'm watching," Derek called back. "I'm always watching." She pushed off and flew down the slide, laughing all the way. When she reached the bottom, she ran straight into his arms, and he lifted her up, spinning her around until they were both dizzy with joy. In that moment, Derek Callahan knew exactly who he was. Not an agent, not a consultant, not a hero. Just a father holding his daughter in a sun-drenched park, grateful for every ordinary moment they had together. Some men chose to change the world. Derek had chosen to change one little girl's world. And that, he had come to understand, was more than enough. The purple sneakers with silver stars would eventually wear out, as all things do. But the memory of this day, of learning to trust again, of finding family in unexpected places, would endure long after the shoes were gone. And sometimes, when the light hit the window just right, Derek could almost see Meredith sitting on that bench, smiling at the life he had built from the ashes of the one they had lost. Some stories end with a bang, with villains defeated and heroes triumphant. But the truest stories end like this, quietly, with small moments of grace that ripple outward into eternity. Derek Callahan had spent his career chasing shadows and catching criminals, but his greatest victory had nothing to do with badges or protocols or bringing down international networks. Later that evening, as Derek tucked Rosie into bed, she reached up and touched his face with her small hand. "Daddy, I have a question." He sat on the edge of her bed, the same bed they had bought at a second-hand store the year Meredith died. "What is it, sweetheart?" She was quiet for a moment, her green eyes searching his face. "When Mommy was here, was she proud of you?" The question pierced through him, unexpected and tender. Derek took a breath, remembering Meredith's smile the day he had come home and told her he was leaving the bureau, remembering how she had cried and laughed at the same time, telling him she had never loved him more. "Yes, baby," he said, his voice thick. "She was proud of me, but not because of the job or the cases or catching bad guys. She was proud because I chose you, Because I chose us." Rosie smiled. That radiant smile that was so much like her mother's. "I'm proud of you too, Daddy. You're the best superhero, even without a cape." Derek leaned down and kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo, feeling the impossible weight and lightness of fatherhood all at once. "Get some sleep, little one. Tomorrow we'll go get ice cream, the fancy kind, with the sprinkles." Rosie giggled. "Promise?" He held up his pinky, and she wrapped hers around it. "Promise." He turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching the outline of his daughter in the darkness. Somewhere out there, Konstantin was still planning, still scheming, still building networks of chaos. Somewhere, Agent Reyes was probably reviewing case files, preparing for the next battle. And somewhere, a little girl named Lily Chen was sleeping safe in her own bed, reunited with her father, alive because Derek had made a choice. The world was full of battles that needed fighting, but tonight, the only battle that mattered was making sure Rosie knew she was loved. Everything else could wait until morning. His greatest victory was this: a little girl in purple sneakers, running toward him with arms outstretched, completely certain that he would catch her. And he always did.